talking to you, you're telling me that my assault doesn't matter, that what happened to me doesn't matter, and that you're going to let people who do these things into power.
The man cornered in the elevator there is Senator Jeff Flake, who cast the deciding vote to send Kavanaugh's nomination to the full Senate. But with the crucial condition that he would only vote yes in that vote if Donald Trump ordered the FBI to investigate allegations of sexual assault.
This country's being ripped apart here, and we've got to make sure that we do due diligence. I think this committee has done a good job, but I do think that we can have a short pause and make sure that the FBI can investigate.
So that's happening. The FBI is looking into it. The allegations against Kavanaugh were made earlier before the same committee by Christine Blasey Ford. She claims that Kavanaugh assaulted her in high school, and it was a moment that was broadcast live on screens around the world.
It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me. Both Brett and Mark were drunkenly laughing.
Mostly, Ford kept her composure, but then when it was his turn to respond, Judge Kavanaugh was tearful and visibly angry.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, revenge on behalf of the Clintons.
It was quite something. This whole hearing really, it was a symbolic battle between the old guard on one side and a generation that's grown up with several versions of Me Too. In the starkest terms, maybe, this is a battle between man and woman, boiled down to he said, she said.
With what degree of certainty do you believe Brett Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
I'm innocent of this charge.
I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling.
I was not at the party described by Dr. Ford.
I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details.
There's been a frenzy on the left to come up with something, anything, to block my confirmation.
So much to look at there. We're going to try and analyze all of this. We have two legal powerhouses with us. Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz, who defended O.J. Simpson and is the author of The Case Against Impeaching Trump. And we're going to be talking to Lisa Bloom, a defense attorney who represented accusers of Fox's Bill O'Reilly. Remember that? She also advised Harvey Weinstein, and she's Gloria Allred's daughter. And Alan Dershowitz joins me now. Alan, you were calling for an FBI investigation into all of this. Now there is one. You must be happy.
Well, I think the American public will benefit by having all the facts laid out. Let the FBI interview every single person whose name has emerged, and even people whose names haven't emerged. That's what the FBI does. I've been questioned by the FBI 1,000 times about former students who are up for positions of authority. They do a very, very thorough job. I also think that there ought to be further investigations of the charges made by other women, particularly the outrageous charges by a woman that she witnessed up to 10 gang rapes, including by Judge Kavanaugh.
She didn't actually say that it was by him. She just said he was in the room.
If that's true, he ought to be in jail. And if that's not true, she ought to be in jail.
He didn't appear to want to be investigated by the FBI. Do you think he can stand up? I mean, they're going to be much more inquisitive than what we just saw in the hearing room.
Well, I have a different view. I think he wanted to be investigated. I don't think he was allowed by his managers in the White House and on the Republican side of the Senate to call for an investigation. I think he genuinely wants an investigation, and if he can't stand up to it, well, he can't get the job.
Do you think that if this ends up where the public, where the FBI, where the government is still in doubt in some form as to what's actually true, can he still sit on the Supreme Court?
Yes.
We saw him making all kinds of accusations about this is a hit job.
He's right. He's right. I mean, if he is being falsely accused, it's a hit job. I have
will
no
we
blame
actually
for
know?
him.
Will we actually
We
know
won't.
at the end of this? And so therefore,
We won't
can
know.
he be on the Supreme Court?
I think he can. Look, he was not my first choice, but he's eminently well qualified. And the burden, and it's a heavy burden, is on the accuser. You do not keep a person off the Supreme Court without being convinced by clear and convincing evidence that he did something disqualifying. And so, yes, I think he can serve. I think it was admirable that he fought back for himself, for his family, for his children, for his friends. I would expect nothing less of somebody who was innocent in being wrongly prosecuted. This
has been very much portrayed. Jeff Flake, the senator, was basically saying the country has been ripped apart by this. It's being portrayed as sort of the Me Too movement against the establishment on the Hill and a bunch of old men who don't really understand. They keep saying, you know, well, she said this happened 35 years ago, and what happened in high school should stay in high school. What do you think of those arguments that it's time for the politicians on the Hill to start listening to the Me Too movement?
I think the Me Too movement has some very strong virtues and some very, very strong vices. It presumes guilt. It assumes that women never lie and that men never tell the truth. It's sexist to its core in its unwillingness to listen to both sides in many instances. And so I don't see this as a conflict between Me Too on the one hand and Republicans on the other. This is a conflict between Me Too on the one hand and civil libertarians on the other, liberals, people like me who have been fighting for due process and civil liberties, people like me who care deeply about women's rights, who support women's rights in every respect, but who also support due process. So don't try to make this a fight between the left and the right or the good guys and the bad guys. I'm a liberal on the left and a good guy, and I have great qualms about any presumption of guilt growing out of the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement has done a lot of good. It's done a lot of harm. Like any movement of extremes, it has to be cautious in its approach, and it has to be monitored to make sure it complies with due process, civil liberties, and the Constitution.
We saw that young woman who says she's a victim of sexual assault, sort of stopping Senator Flake on the elevator and saying, if you let this man sit on the Supreme Court with any doubt, then that means that you're not listening to us, that these things can continue to happen and that's wrong. What do you say to her?
People shouldn't listen to people in elevators screaming. We have no idea what her credibility is. We have no idea what happened to her. Just because she's a woman and just because she's screaming doesn't give her the right to assault a senator on the elevator. Let her file a lawsuit. Let her take legal action. Let her file an affidavit. Let her do it in a dignified way. Screaming at senators is not a substitute for due process of law.
How can this be healed? Can it?
Well, I think it may be healed a little bit during the midterms. If the Democrats win Congress, there will be a better system of checks and balances. I'm hoping the Democrats do win Congress. More women, but you know, you don't vote for people based on gender. You vote for people based on qualifications. There should be more women who run and more women should be elected, but they should be elected on their merits.
Alan Dershowitz, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
So we just heard from Alan Dershowitz, who is arguing that the Me Too movement has had not entirely a positive impact on the Kavanaugh hearings. Joining me now is Lisa Bloom from Los Angeles. So, Lisa, I mean, what do you think of that argument, that this whole idea of the Me Too movement, that people should be believed, has interfered, as Alan Dershowitz says, with due process? Has Me Too hurt progress in terms of what's happened to Kavanaugh's nomination or not?
Alan Dershowitz does not speak for the Me Too movement. He doesn't speak for women. He doesn't speak for survivors of sexual assault. I have represented them for over 30 years, hundreds of them, represent dozens of them right now. The Me Too movement is an extremely positive worldwide movement of millions of women and also many men saying, enough is enough. We're going to speak out about sexual assault. It's wrong. We're going to believe survivors when they tell their story, especially when they have nothing to gain and everything to lose, as Dr. Ford did.
We saw that such a moving moment with this woman who says she's a sexual assault victim, basically jumping Senator Jeff Flake, who not allowing the doors to close and saying, if you let this man with all of these doubts about what he may have done onto the Supreme Court, you will be saying that what happened to me, what happened to all of us never mattered.
She's absolutely right that every person on that committee who votes to bring the nomination forward. Everybody in the Senate who votes for Judge Kavanaugh is slapping in the face every survivor of sexual assault in this country. I can tell you that here in Los Angeles, I have a case that is currently before the U.S. Supreme Court. It's my case of Janice Dickinson versus Bill Cosby for defamation after she accused him of rape and he called her a liar. We do not want Brett Kavanaugh sitting in judgment over us in that case.
I was really struck by a number of the comments that were made by the senators about, you know, almost like boys will be boys, which is comments that we've heard forever. The president made comments that could be interpreted that way. How much has actually changed? I mean, you very briefly represented Harvey Weinstein, saying that he was an old dinosaur learning new ways. Are the senators, are people on the Hill dinosaurs? And if they are they learning new ways?
Well, what I got Harvey Weinstein to do was acknowledge his wrongdoing, apologize, and promise not to go after the women. That was before he was accused of sexual assault, and it was just verbal misconduct. I thought that was the right thing for him to do. I think that's the right thing for everybody to do. I think Brett Kavanaugh should say, if it's true, and I and millions of others do think it's true, that when he was a teenage boy, he behaved very badly with girls. That at the time, there was a cultural moment where it was considered hijinks, horseplay, fooling around, but he can now see the very long-term damage that he inflicted on Dr. Ford and others, and that he's very sorry about that.
Lindsey Graham, who we saw got very angry about some of the questioning in the hearing, he's a Republican senator, said, "I know I'm a single white male from South Carolina and I'm told I should shut up, but I will not shut up." It's sort of like what Alan Dershowitz was saying, is like, the Me Too movement's gone too far. Let's get back to due process and treat it the way that we've always treated these things.
Nobody's asking Lindsey Graham or Alan Dershowitz to shut up. What we are asking them to do is listen and learn. Listen to women's stories about our lives. They are different than your lives because so many of us have been victims of sexual assault. This may be something that's hard for you to understand. You may feel that men are just falsely accused and women just do this blithely and for fun, but that's not true.
Senator Flake has said that the U.S. has been ripped apart over this. What impact do you see these hearings and the FBI investigation perhaps having on the midterms that are coming up in just a bit more than a month?
Well, I have a message for the Republicans who are saying they're just going to railroad this through at any cost. November is coming. The women of America are fired up. I think they're going to see a huge backlash in the midterm elections, that we are just not going to tolerate this kind of insult and disrespect to women. You know, we saw what happened yesterday, and thank goodness it was all televised. And thank goodness that what happens in the next week will be as well. We are watching, and I think we're going to vote out anybody who won't show basic respect to women.
So much to watch for here. Lisa Bloom, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.